Thank you for including us. In this project, what we're going to talk about is our efforts in a redistricting contest in Philadelphia using OR methods to win one of the prizes in the contest and actually do very well by all of the measures in the contest. And so our talk is about how we developed our OR tools to do districting, which is a subject that has been in the OR literature for decades, but we actually learned quite a bit from doing this in several different ways, both technically and the use of OR in this kind of area. Okay, so the outline of our talk is who we are and why we did this, the timeline for the project, the contest we're involved in, what we learned, our results, our testimony on this project, and the larger significance of our approach. Okay? And districting, as this is the political season, and we've all been reading about it in the news, and it's the situation where, you know, there are all these professionals and they do districting in a way where actually we're in a situation where the politicians select us rather than we select the politicians. And that's one of the major determinants of the structure of governments at all levels in the United States. And so, you know, we're public citizens, and we're doing essentially public citizen OR, and we wanted better government with fairer districting. And the other thing about this is a project with a budget of $0. We were doing this as citizens and just showing that it is possible to actually do this kind of stuff that before would have cost many thousands of dollars for free if you're willing to go in and just play with existing tools. And so why Philadelphia? Is because we live there, and we've been involved in Philadelphia projects off and on over the years. And the really key reason is guys just want to have fun. It's been over 40 years since I've been doing this stuff, and there's always the thrill of the new project and the adventure and what you learn when you get into something where you don't know how it's going to conclude. Okay, here is the original Gerrymander, the salamander-shaped district in Massachusetts. So we all think of this as a modern political problem, but actually this cartoon appeared in 1812. So politicians have known for a long time how to manage the districting process to get the outcomes they desire. Okay, and here are the Philadelphia councilmanic districts. There are 10 councilmanic districts plus another several council persons who are elected over the whole city. And you can see over here, there are places in the district boundaries where they were described as spit-over boundaries. You could stand on one side and spit over the boundary on the other side. That's how small they were. So, and, you know, the two really snaky districts going up to the northeast there were the number 1 and number 2 most gerrymandered councilmanic districts in the United States. And, you know, that is why we're interested in getting involved. Okay? So, districting is something that you can anticipate. There's a regular timeline. So we started in 2009 doing a literature search, connecting with interested parties. I've been involved with some of the local political activist groups, and one of my friends connected me with a firm called Xavia that does a lot of GIS stuff, but they don't consider themselves a GIS firm. They consider themselves a firm that does decision support tools around GIS. And so they created a set of data for us based on the 2000 census so we could do all our development work on that. And so we had an initial version working without contiguity constraints to keep the districts all connected up in 2009. And in 2010, we started to work with the neighborhood interest groups, and I'm on the board of one of them, but I couldn't get them interested in this activity because they really didn't understand what was going on. But we persisted, and by 2011, we both were proceeding technically and to some extent politically. We found the contiguity literature to better improve the modeling of these kind of districting problems. We implemented an approach where we could go beyond standard integer programming by breeding solutions. And what was unknown to us is that Azavia had a grant from the Sloan Foundation to develop some nice districting tools for the general public to do districting. And in fact, the state of Arizona used those tools for people to be able to redistrict in Arizona. And in fact, I understand the Arizona districts are being contested in court because the citizens did a better job than the officials who were involved. And so in the fall, we won in one category. We were number 3 in another category, and we had a whole bunch of winners for still another category. So, but we were allowed to enter officially in only one category, and we did. And in that category, we won. And actually, in that category, we had the top 4 solutions, and the nearest solution was like 7% worse than ours. The nearest solution by someone other than us. Okay, here are the ground rules for designing districts. Each district must be contiguous. That is, you ought to be able to get from every point in the district to every other point without leaving the district. Equipopulation. Now that's an imprecise term. Some states, like Minnesota, mean it has to be truly down to one person. But most states have rules like within 5%, and in Philadelphia they made it within 10%. And the other rule is compact, but interestingly, compact is not well defined, as we'll see. And compactness, the contiguity and equipopulation are legal requirements in the legislation. And compactness is required just as a device to avoid the gerrymandering solution. And the big issue is, what is compact? And this became a major theme for us. And this both illustrates how people have thought about it, and the big issue with compact. The first one is, there are 8 measures here. The first one is the classic pornography test. If you look at it, and if it looks like it's not pornography, it's not pornography, and if it looks like pornography, it is. The second one is center of gravity, and that's the one we use for a lot of our districting in logistics, and that's the minimize the sum of squared distances. And then the third one is called the Schwarzberg measure. Here you measure the perimeter of each district, you construct the circle with the same area, and you take the ratio of the perimeter of the district to the perimeter of the circle of the same area. Now, we're going to give you some numbers with this. Azavia actually implemented it the inverse of that, but that's okay. I won't go through the others, but the key point is that if you have 8 measures, that means that there's really there's no true measure of compactness. There's a sense of compactness, but these are all proxies for what is really, what turned out, as Steve found after the contest was over. He did some, mechanical Turk experiments and found that what we viewed as compact with visual tests in mechanical Turk, it turned out to be a pretty good measure from how people reacted. Okay? So, and the other thing about all of these measures is that in 1988, Peyton Young wrote an article where he just took and created some of the ugliest polygons you could see and showed that every measure failed on some polygonal shape. Okay, so clearly proxy measures are a problem. Okay, and there's no good natural objective function here. That's really critical. And then, what's very interesting is that as we first started generating solutions, I went to my friend who connected me with Xavier and showed him some of the maps. He said they're really bad because they break up neighborhoods. And an old industrial city like Philadelphia is a city of neighborhoods. And having neighborhoods be in the same district is actually an important feature because these are how people identify themselves. This is how they relate to each other. It's a city where people truly relate to their neighborhoods more than the city as a whole. And you've got to adapt to that. And so on top of no natural, certifiable right compactness measure, there's no good measure. There are all these other side issues that need to be considered. Okay? So what we did as an integer program was the original p-median problem, solved quickly. We did it at the net level of 155 neighborhoods, where each neighborhood could be the center. And then we expanded to, when we got into the contest, to 1687 wards. But we kept the 155 neighborhoods as the centers because it kept the integer program in reasonable scale. And then as we imposed constraints to identify the neighborhoods and keep neighborhoods apart that shouldn't be together because they didn't like each other, and then the compactness deteriorated. It was interesting to see the trade-off. Again, even if we view this as politically neutral, these, compactness doesn't necessarily create good districts. Okay? And so, we thought when we got to the finer grade detail of all the wards in the city, that we could, maintain a better notion of compactness and meet some of the neighborhood conditions. Not really. But then when we got to be much more fine-grained, we lost our contiguity. Okay? With coarse grain, you get a natural contiguity. And what was interesting is if you look at the papers in the literature, they come up with ways of avoiding having to deal with contiguity directly by generating, contiguous districts and then doing it like a crew scheduling problem. But Sharabe in 2009 came up with a nice representation that did not lead to an exponential explosion in the number of variables, never mind the solution times. But still, it led to too many variables and constraints with a finer grain detail. So we had to figure out how to do that. So our solution method was, when we solved the integer program, was use 155 neighborhoods as the centers, and then we would fix the centers, and then we would go to the 1687 wards and allocate those to the fixed centers with the contiguity constraints imposed. And with that, we actually found a good solution. And now, if we were to do it like the original work that Sid Hess did, we would iterate through and change our centers and update. We didn't do that because what we realized is this was only the starting point and not the end of the analysis. Okay, again, it's because the integer programs couldn't take a nuanced view. We developed a genetic algorithm to start from the integer solution, because getting contiguity in a standard genetic algorithm is not that easy. But if we start from a contiguous solution and breed contiguous solutions, then we can do pretty well. And so we use the IP solution as a starting point for our genetic algorithm. And we had and we also created multiple integer programming solutions by changing, like the parameters, use more than square distance, something like that. And then we just did all our breeding, and let's see, and so we were able to capture a whole bunch of feasible solutions. We got to 116 in total, okay? And so with no ward splits, and that was one of the contest criteria, no ward splits. We generated 116 of them, when I didn't think you could generate one given the population structure of the wards. Okay, so Azavia, the local newspapers, and the public media group sponsored this contest with 4 prizes: best overall, best districts using wards as the population subunits, minimum population deviation, and compactness. Okay, they did this in late July with an early September deadline. Okay, and now what happened to us though is that we were using center of gravity, and they chose the Schwarzberg measure. So it's another reason why we didn't bother trying to soup up the integer program, because we needed to change the objective function, and we couldn't get the data. Okay, so we had in a way that we could feed into the integer program. What's interesting is that they had a full house with standing room only showing up for this contest. And again, this is part of the theater you do to put pressure on politicians to get something to happen. So we had a little over a month, so we had a tight deadline and had to figure out what we were going to do. And we had a great time doing it. Okay? And so this contest resolved our publicity problem for our results. But we did have to change what we were doing at the last minute, and we focused on the 2 prizes: compactness, no splitting of wards, and we did a third just for the fun of it on the side, and again the multiple solutions. Started with the IP, and what we did for getting the compact solution, we started with a center of gravity solution, and used their visual tool where we could just click and move various wards. And we did things to straighten edges, and we developed a set of heuristics. There's some diagonal streets that define wards, and we could use those diagonals to sort of shape things to get closer to the kinds of like hexagons you would want to have to be the compact kind of shapes if you had actually the appropriately shaped wards. And we were very conscious of heading right for the boundary of the city, because that didn't affect the boundary, was always going to be there. And so we just used a bunch of these heuristics, used them, saved the solution, used them again, and eventually got a very compact solution to the districting problem. And this is one of the solutions that we used in our testimony before City Council on our results. And what's nice, and this solution looks very nice. In the testimony, we actually said don't use this. And the reason why was that it destroyed underlying neighborhood structures. Okay, and we said that was important. And so what we found was by pushing too hard to meet a single quantitative objective function, we were weak on other measures. And a lot of these measures were non-quantifiable measures. Schwarzberg was actually a terrible measure because of the odd shapes of all the wards, because of the funny street patterns. So if you're going to do this, you want to make sure you use multiple measures of compactness and trade them off. But nevertheless, what you really want to do is you want to use this as a good starting solution. And then, there are legitimate trade-offs to make. And here's an example. We allow the population deviation to increase. And look at what happened to our squared deviation measure. So that, in fact, constraints really should be part of the objective function in doing this. Okay? And so we had our 116 maps, and Steve's going to take it from here.
Okay, I'm going to say a little bit about the evolutionary algorithm we used and how that kicks in and what it's relevant. I'll show you some maps and tell you about our testimony, and then discourse of what I think is what we think are the larger significance of this. So we used a variety of genetic algorithm, evolutionary algorithm, to generate what turned out to be 116 legally valid. I want to emphasize these are legally valid. They're contiguous, and they're actually within 5% on population, not 10%, but 5%. Maps involving no split of the wards. Now, in Philadelphia, there are 66 wards and 1,600 and change ward divisions. The wards actually have some salience. They're not census district concepts. They're Philadelphia concepts. And they were developed, last drawn in the mid-1990s, and they do reflect some neighborhood structure. That's why they are there. But the population has shifted since. But it's a reasonable thing if you want to preserve neighborhoods to go with the wards. And the contest recognized that. So we just stuck at the ward level for the genetic algorithm. And the way it worked is that we got 4 distinct contiguous solutions from the IP side. We used these each individually to generate 50 different contiguous solutions, none of which was feasible because they violated the population constraints. So then we had 4 different initial populations and that were fed into the GA, and they were bred and run multiple times and so forth to get 116 contiguous population valid solutions selected on a simple measure of compactness. So the outcome of this is that actually our best map on the Schwarzberg measure is pretty good. It wouldn't have won the contest. I think the one that did was about 74, and as things go, this would have been in the top 20 or something. It's reasonably good, but not outstanding. But remarkable given that we're working at such a granular level, because that matters for the Schwarzberg measure. Our best map used on population deviation, with the 10% variance, we could have 150,000 difference. And our best map was 2335 on population. So that was quite remarkable, given that it's not being selected on population except as a constraint on this. And we also got our favorite one, which we'll show you in a second here, and why it's our favorite. Okay, so this is the one that's best on population equality, and this is found by the GA. And there it is. It would have been. It would not have won the population thing because there was like 0 difference or something. But they're working at the at the block level on this. So this is really pretty good on population. Our preferred solution is here, and we got nudged by I think certainly by the contest, and I think by us into a better thing. But if you look side by side, they're pretty different. We don't know what went on behind closed doors, but I'll give you a little bit of a hint here. There were 2 public hearings that were held under pressure, actually, from the general public, and we testified at both of them. The first one happened to be that I testified, and this was done after the contest was over, but before the results had been announced. And the background is this, is that you saw earlier in Fred's talk that it was the 7th district that you could spit across and so forth. That was gerrymandered against the Latinos, against the Hispanic population, but it was the Hispanics that got the biggest increase in Philadelphia population over the 10 years. And in spite of attempts, a Latina, Maria Quinones Sanchez, actually won the district anyway, and she was on a warpath to get a better district. And so she held a hearing, and I testified at this. And the gist of this was, we have a lot of maps. There's lots of ways of doing this. People should be empowered, and you should go look at them. After the presentation was the big thing, as far as I'm concerned, with this hearing. And that is somebody who had actually testified earlier from the Hispanic community, who was an activist in this, came up and said, "Do you really have the maps?" I gave him the testimony. I said, "Here, it's on the web. Go take a look. Go to the web, look at the maps, find one you like, and bargain from it." And his reaction was, "Oh, wow." And he smiled and went away. And that's what happened there. The second hearing was for the winners of the contest. And there Fred testified. And as the slide notes, and as Fred mentioned earlier, all of the winners of the contest said, "Well, you should pick our map. You should do our map." And Fred said, "No, you shouldn't do our map, because this is the most compact one, and it does gross violence to the neighborhoods of the city, which no one had in their optimization program because the data is not available. You have to look at it. You have models, but the models don't incorporate all the important information." That's what's going on. And then many of these points have been made already, but it's really a multi-objective problem. There are multiple interests that are legitimate in bringing this, in making these decisions and so forth. And but what we want is a clean and a fair process. And why not look at the GAs? So that was our recommendation, the results of the GA. Now, in terms of the overall project, we accomplished several things. One is we won on the most compact. We won on that. And as mentioned before, there were 4 categories. One is best overall, which is crapshoot. One is equal population. We did extremely well on that, except for the zero variance. A couple of ours would have done came in next. And then the third category was on districts that did not violate any ward boundaries. And actually, all 116 of ours did not violate the ward boundaries. So, but we were not allowed to enter that one. And we found others as well through the IP process. We think we helped Quinoa Sanchez at least bargain a bit for a better district. And there were technical things on the IP side in terms of an aggregation method that Fred went over quickly. There were also some minor innovations on the GA side with the neighborhood mutation and use of multiple mutation rates, but we won't go into it. It's in the paper. And basically what we did, again, we used standard IP methods to generate multiple, in this case 4 starting points for the GA, and the GA then searched and found, in this case 116. We ran out of time, we had a hurricane, etc. And a small point about sensitivity actually is we actually did finish the last things. We were running on laptops during the hurricane because that was the deadline. And the last point is the sensitivity analysis. And in the interest of time, I won't go into it. But think of it this way: you have a map, say, with a certain amount of contiguity, with a compactness score. And an interesting question is, well, gee, maybe that map doesn't do so well on equal population. What's the best we can do on equal population? Given that we only want to, say, drop by a measure of 5 units on compactness, right? A good sensitivity analysis question, right? It would be representative things. That's in the data, right? It's in the data is a sample of what's there, but that information from the sample can be estimated. So I think that points to larger uses in the future, larger kinds of things. And speaking of larger things. In general, we're going to find that the integer programming is in this context and in many others, is going to be unstable with respect to changes in important input values. A lot of the information that's relevant to the problem is not capturable in the model. It's not captured in the model. The information is just not there, right? And further, decision makers, being decision makers, like to decide. They don't like to be told, here's a number. And in this case, we see it in spades with the political process, is that people have a legitimate interest in getting their voices heard. They don't want just one solution. And we needed a principled way of generating more solutions. That's part of the GA story. And we did combine, I think, creatively, classical OR with modern heuristic methods. There's an old saying, we got the quote wrong here, but there's an old saying that in OR that all models are false, some models are useful, quote should be at the end, And what we think we've produced here and demonstrated is a way to make admittedly false models more useful. And the basic pattern is this. We go into a situation with a model. We define what we call the solutions of interest. This was all legally valid solutions with reasonable compactness scores. Secondly, we find a way of sampling from that conceptual space. We did that with the GA and the IP stuff to get at least 116 different solutions from that interesting space. And then we offer this plurality of solutions to the decision makers for legitimate deliberation. These are reasonable candidates for discussion. And it's objective and public and so forth. And our vision is that this pattern will be seen as the normal thing in the future. Thank you.